Yeah.
And so going into the early 90s, so I mean, it was, as I remember it, because I remember some of the, like the land holdings of the big developers, and the fact that banks and the developers were really partners. It wasn't a lender-borrower relationship.
In many
really
cases, that's right. Yeah.
And then when it hit, I mean, it hit you guys as much as it hit everybody else, right? So it might, for guys who weren't around, it might be worth just sort of describing how we went into that and, you know, how development yields were calculated at Winston's after a couple of drinks.
You know, that was probably the toughest time that I remember in my career, because, you know, the 80s had been pretty boom times. We were all building pretty aggressively, shopping centers, office buildings, and of course we were leasing them out based on, you know, this great escalation of rents that kept happening year after year. And so a lot of us in, you know, 1990 were delivering new shopping centers and new office buildings, and, you know, suddenly, you know, the bubble burst, and we saw it first in retail. You know, retail sort of, because of its tie, I get really to the consumer. Retail responds much quicker to downturn, and equally they came out of it earlier. So retail, I remember we had just opened a center called Erin Mills, and I think I must have renegotiated 60% of the leases in there. And despite that, we still had failure after failure. So those were very, those were tough times, and it was, you know, tough coming to work every day when you're sitting there and many times you've got an individual in front of you whose whole life is tied up in this retail business, and, you know, there's times you just had to say no, and you knew it meant he was about to lose everything, and you know, that was not a lot of fun. But it, you know, it did teach you that, you know, about being honest and open and frank with people, but also listening. You know, I think all those people went out upset, but, you know, most of them felt they'd been listened to, and they hadn't just been told no. Now, the boss says no, it's not happening. You know, you'd talk through it, you'd walk through it, spend the time, and that kind of communication and respect that you showed them. I think, you know, down the road, a lot of these guys were back and, you know, had great relationships, even though I'd had to deliver some very bad news to them. So that was very tough. And then office kind of chugged along for another year or so, and then somebody dusted off that CCAA legislation from the 30s, and they discovered they could go into CCAA and repudiate leases or portions of leases, and so that's when the office hit. And you know, there were several companies in Toronto that were, you know, really doing office deals back then that were negative net effective deals. You know, you might get your operating costs, but with an inducement to get the guy in, and with you know, rent kicking in, you know, a year later or at a very minimal level and escalating very slowly, they really were net effective. They were negative, but you know, you got people in the building, and you started covering your occupancy, out of pocket costs, even if not keeping your banker happy. So that really started, and then and the tough time is knowing when you start to hold the line and say, okay, no, we want real rent now. We've got to start getting real rent back. And I remember when we started to see retail come back, just given the history of retail followed by office, and the same on the upswing. We started TD Centre. We started just holding out for rents, and certainly missed a few deals initially, but you know, then they started coming around. But so that was a very challenging few years in both office and retail.
You talked about your lenders, the relationship. I mean, that relationship lending was when it was all tested, right?
Oh yes, absolutely. And you know, we had Dick Thompson on our board, and and TD were our big lenders, and Dick probably stayed on the board because then our company got into difficulty in the mid '90s as a result of all this and falling revenues, and then distributions to our shareholders, and then we were all offside on covenants, and so we got into a restructuring at the time. But Dick stayed on our board, and the TD Bank worked with us probably more than you probably could ever see today. But there had been a strong relationship, and we were still big partners, and that truly was that relationship. Had that not been there, it would have been a very different outcome for Cadillac Fairview.
And it worked out for TD, right?
And it worked out for TD. Eventually, yes, it did very well. And then we ultimately bought them out of their real estate in 2000. I guess that was.
I've still got photostat, the commission check.
Yeah, there you go.
95, Bruce Duncan arrived.
Yeah, 95. We went through a restructuring within the company. So the debt, which had been put on the company by J&B and all these funds, Blackstone, Goldman Sachs, and an outfit called Oaktree had bought up a lot of this debt and bonds, and so they basically took over the restructuring of the company, and they put Bruce Duncan, who actually came out of JMB, although he'd not been ever involved in the original deal. And at this point in time, JMB was completely persona non grata with certainly all the past shareholders, and there weren't many of them left actually, but there were a few. But Bruce came up in '95 to see us through that restructuring, and so then it was. So it was in '90. So we got through that. I got our plan approved in the. I think that was probably late '95, although it may have been '96. I'm not quite sure, but got our plan approved, and then the markets, everything started to pick up, and we came back, and then in '97, we took the company public again.
That's right, because you had the share ticker, I remember, in the lobby at
yes.
the fifth floor.
Yeah, that's right. So we were public from '97, from the fall of '97, basically till the deal to take it private again was done in the fall of '99, and it closed in January or February of 2000.
And would that have been Claude Lamoureux during his tenure, or?
Claude Lamoureux was the head of teachers throughout that period. In fact, we had a relationship with teachers in that we had a couple of joint ventures with them and were managing some property. So they'd had a bit of a look at Cadillac, and then when the Goldman, Blackstone, Oaktree group were together, teachers came in at that time. They came in with fresh new cash into the company, and I think they were about 20% owners, round numbers, at that time. So then, we got through that, got our plan approved, sort of got back to work as usual, and then the Goldmans and the Blackstones and so on wanted to liquidity event, and so in '97 we took the company out public again. Blackstone held on to a position, teachers held on to their full position, sorry, did I say Blackstone? Goldman's held on to a position. I think Blackstone was out, Oaktree was out shortly after that. And in fact, so during during that interim period, we had guys from each of those investment bank companies on our board, and Jack Curtin, I think, is on the board. So he's stepping down from the board because he's back working at Goldman's now. But he was on the board from '94 till now, basically. And at that time, then Bob Bertram from Teachers was on the board, and then as I say, in '99, they made a bid for all outstanding shares of the company that was successful, and that's when they basically took full control of, and I guess fundamentally privatized, Cadillac Fairview. So we became the real estate arm of the fund, although I was always very careful not to allow it to become sort of a division. And we kept separate board, separate auditors for a long time. And we kept running ourselves as if we were a public company. The discipline of that was good. And we reported that way to teachers. And so we had a wonderful, they were a great partner.
Were they largely hands-off?
They were very hands-off. I can honestly say that if I didn't call Claude Lamoureux, I would never have spoken to him. I used to go and see Bob Bertram monthly, go up and have a chat with him. But no, they gave us a large sort of rolling allocation that we could call down at any time, and on any project that our board approved, they just approved an allocation. So they were extremely hands-off, and of course the company did very well, and that always helps, I'm sure. Had we been in tougher times, that may not have been the case. But I think generally they're an excellent partner, and they bought what they thought was a great platform, and they didn't want to mess with it.
And did anything change over the sort of tenure from that point right through to when you retired?
In terms of the relationship with,
yeah. Is it still that way today?
I believe so, but certainly in my time there, yeah, we had it was a great relationship.
That's an amazing amount of freedom for people who are controlling that much money, and it became an increasingly important piece of the puzzle, correct?
Yeah. It was about $20 billion in assets, and we had very little debt on the company at all through the days with Teachers.
Yeah.